Hello, my name is Walter Little. This is Veterans History Project. We're here at Metro East in Gresham, Oregon, and the date is February 27th, 2016. And I'm here with Mr. Jere Hudson. Mr. Jere Hudson, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And I understand that you were in the Army.
I was in the Army, yes. I stayed in the Army through my basic training and AIT training. Went on to OCS, got my commission there, and served for 3 years basically. Got out of the Army and joined the reserves, stayed in the reserves until retirement, actually.
Where were you born, if you don't mind me asking?
I was born in Louisiana, in Bossier City, an Air Force base. My father was a pilot, and he was an Air Force officer and remained until his retirement.
And what rank did he achieve?
He was a full colonel when he retired, and he was the head of the ROTC in Gainesville, Florida, at the university there.
And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 sisters still living, yes, another sister who has passed on.
And did any of your siblings go in the military?
No. Sadly, I think for my dad, my baby sister actually almost got a commission and then hurt her leg and couldn't continue on, but she tried.
So how did you find your way into the military? Were you drafted, or?
I actually was in college at Auburn University, and I'd gone 2 years there and had some credits. I was tired of going to college and wanted to become involved in the war in Vietnam, actually. I believed in it, and I wanted to join. I also thought for my own advancement that it would be a really good career move to join the Army, attempt to get a commission. I thought I could, and that was my goal, and to get married. And I figured that by becoming an officer in the Army, I had a good chance of marrying this particular girl that I wanted to marry.
Well, that sounds good.
That worked out.
But how is it you grew up with all this Air Force experience, but you ended up in the Army?
My eyes weren't good enough to fly, and I didn't see any point in being in the Air Force if I couldn't fly, especially with my father being a pilot. Also, I didn't want my father to feel like my father had influenced my career in any way. If I had been in the Air Force, I felt like he would always be kind of looking over my shoulder, perhaps helping me out on occasion or getting me out of trouble, and I kind of wanted to break away from that.
Well, wouldn't it have been safer to go in as a support in the Air Force rather than a ground pounder in Vietnam? I mean,
I'm sure that almost anything I did was safer than becoming a line officer in the infantry in Vietnam. Yes. In terms of safety, it probably wasn't a good idea at all.
So you had a couple years of college before you actually enlisted. So you started off as an officer then?
No, I had to go to OCS. 2 years of college at that time got you into OCS if everything else worked out and you had, physically fit and had some experience in leadership and so forth. They went through the process. I'm not sure all their process, but I seemed to qualify for OCS.
So how long was your basic training then?
Oh, basic training was the same as everyone else. The basic training was the same, and AIT, Advanced Individual Training, which I took at Fort Lewis, was also whatever it was at the time.
So
none of that.
3 months, and then
none of that was different. Once I was holding over for a long time, what they called holdovers, which just meant that they were still waiting for that line of recruits and officers to get through the Fort Benning school, and that, I graduated from there in November '67, November the 8th. I graduated as a second lieutenant, of course, with everybody else, and got married 10 days later out in California.
So you got married before being deployed?
Yes. In fact, my wife and I had 6 or 8 months together, and again in Fort Lewis. They shipped us to Fort Lewis, and they put us in a training situation, put me in a training situation, just kind of holding place for a few weeks.
So what was your MOS and how did this come about?
I was an infantryman from the time I got in. I wanted to be an infantryman, just basic infantry. My idea, of course, was to be a line officer in the infantry, and so one of the reasons I think that I got into OCS so easily is because I was willing to do exactly what they needed. What they needed at the time for Vietnam was a line officer, platoon leader. And I ended up being a platoon leader for the 9 months that I was in Vietnam.
So what exactly is a line officer?
Platoon leader, basically.
But we're talking front line.
Yes.
So you were going where the danger was.
Yes. We were out at a fire base. Our main base camp was Dong Tam, but once we would leave Dong Tam and stay out for months at a time in little fire bases. We seldom were in Dong Tam itself, except perhaps for 4 or 5 days, perhaps even a week, but no more than that, just to recoup and clean our weapons and sometimes do chores. But basically we're out in a fire base, and I have some photographs of the fire base later if you'd like to see them. But one of the things that we did at the fire base, it was called fire base. We ended up calling it Fire Base Schroeder because our battalion commander, Schroeder, Colonel Schroeder, was killed while I was there. And they changed it from Fire Base Dirk, which is what it was, to Fire Base Schroeder.
And what exactly is a fire base?
Well, I have a picture of it if you'd like to see it. At least I can show you some of the places that we lived. This is our doc, actually. That was Doc Barton. He was probably 18, 19 years old. He was our medic for our platoon. And that's real typical in the rainy season of how we lived. We would get sandbags, and what you see there are ammunition crates that are filled with dirt. We'd stack them up like Lego blocks and fill sandbags. We'd put perforated steel plate on top of those bunkers, and then we put sandbags or ammunition crates on top of those. You can see me standing next to a bunch of sandbags. They were fun to fill. Sometimes we'd have the children in the village would come over and help us fill them. We'd give them sea rations.
I think some of our homeless live in better conditions than those.
Well, that water's pretty much looks like Portland, doesn't it?
It looks like it's rather wet inside of those places.
It was, yeah, you couldn't dig down. If you dug a foxhole in Vietnam, at least in the Delta where I was, this is Delta, if you dug a foxhole, it would fill with water. I think the water table was probably maybe 12 inches down. So you couldn't dig a hole deeper than 12 inches and not have it fill up with water. Everything had to be above ground.
So what was your platoon's main job then? Did you do scouting?
Well, we would go out at night. Usually we'd set up ambushes at night along the paddy dikes, along the canals. There are tremendous numbers of canals all throughout the Delta and small rivers. And these small rivers, of course, had sampans on them. The sampans were restricted at night. They could not go out at night because that's, of course, when the Viet Cong would be bringing in supplies or bringing in soldiers, or the North Vietnamese would have brought down either weapons or personnel. So we kept those closed at night as much as possible, and we would set up alongside larger canals, smaller canals, wouldn't matter. And basically, anyone who came by, we would first try to get them to come ashore, and if they either jumped into the water or tried to get out the other side, we would engage them at that time. So that was mostly what we did. We would sometimes just set up by trails, and trails that we knew were being used to infiltrate weapons again or personnel. We would know this from various sources, either human sources telling us that this was an area that they were in, radar searches. I learned later that we had some pretty sophisticated instruments like IR, which we didn't know about at the time. Radar, side-looking radar, things that were very sophisticated that were above our qualifications to know about. But yeah, we had a lot of interesting equipment, and so we would know, at least the people in intelligence, military intelligence or CIA, or would tell us where to go, where the enemy was expected to be, or whether they had They believed that they were. And I'll tell you a story that I had forgotten all about until you asked, how did they know they were there? We had some people in civilian uniforms, or not uniforms at all, simply dressed in suits, looking rather like you, who came in and gave a briefing telling us that there were signs of groups of Viet Cong in a certain area. They sent us out to this area, very wooded, along some trails and things, and we looked around all day. We couldn't find them. In fact, there was no activity at all, so much as we could tell. No cigarette butts, no old equipment lying around. And we would stay there. We'd all find the place that they said, right there, right there. They'd give us exact coordinates. We'd say, there's no one here. We'd sit down, we'd eat lunch. All the men would drink out of their canteens and kind of go off in the bushes and pee. And we'd get back on the helicopters and come back. A couple of days later, the same people would be back. They said, they're right there. We know they're there. How do you know? Well, we can't tell you. But they're there. And so we'd go out again. Nobody there. All the men drink their water, go off in the bushes and pee. Turns out they were picking up the signals from the urine that all of our men were peeing, and they were peeing in the same place every day. And that's what they were picking up, chemical sorts from that particular area. So we did that 3 times.
You got to hunt yourselves.
They were just picking up on our own. So that's something I had forgotten all about until you just mentioned that.
Now, did you do these trips nightly, or did they have more platoons and you rotated? It was like a platoon's turn and Bravo platoon?
Well, we'd have usually one platoon at the fire base for guarding the fire base, at least one platoon of infantry, sometimes 2, and sometimes 2 platoons would go out. The platoons would, at least at fire base Dirk and Schroeder, would almost always split in half. So you'd have half a platoon and you'd send them out in one place, half a platoon in the other. To some extent they would support themselves, although at night there's not much you can do except be there kind of to warn the other ones if you see some people wandering around. The thing that you should do on a particular mission where you're setting up an ambush is not to let anyone see you. So you'd walk through the area, you'd say, well, we're going to set up here, and the machine gun's going to go there, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, I'm going to be right here, the radio's going to be here with me. You'd set up everybody in place, and then you'd go away. And you'd go away the length of 2 football fields, more or less, or at least 2 football fields, sometimes 3. And then you'd wait until dark, and then you'd come back in and set up in the same place. And this is so that people out on the paddy dikes or out working or happening by wouldn't see that you were setting up there. Very important. And if you didn't do that, you could bet that they would know where you were and you'd get a mortar attack that same night. So that's how we would do it. We'd split up a platoon into 2.
Now, what size is the platoon?
Well, we had very small platoons because we didn't have TO&E, table of equipment allowances tells you how many you're supposed to have in a platoon. We never had that many. There were always people moving in and out. We were always splitting off, especially things like machine guns. We would give a machine gun to another platoon, a machine gunner or a squad of 6 or 8 people would go someplace with another platoon if they needed it, or to go out to, we did a lot of helicopter missions, for instance. You couldn't put an entire platoon on 2 helicopters, so you'd split off a couple of squads, of 10, 12 men. So we couldn't really put a number on the number of people who went out. A typical ambush for our particular platoon would be 15 to 20 people.
And if you ran across the enemy, how many people were you likely to engage?
It was hard to tell. You never could tell. In the Delta where we were, we had smaller units than they had up north. We wouldn't usually be running into, at least our particular battalion, wouldn't be running into large numbers like regimental size units all at once that I was aware of.
So yours is more raiding party type things?
Yeah. A lot of the people we were fighting in the Delta were not even regular Vietnamese army units. A lot of them were guerrillas who were not even wearing uniforms.
So sympathizers?
Yeah, guerrillas. They would be armed with an AK-47 and perhaps a vest or something, but basically wearing native clothing and easily blending back into the villages. So it was very hard to tell, unless they were carrying a weapon, who your friends were there.
Now, did you move around a lot then, or were you basically stationed in one spot?
Well, we would move. We were stationed there at the fire base. We'd occasionally drive into Dongtam for a couple of days. But basically, we were out in that fire base or out in the field. And they would often pick us up in helicopters. In a group of 8 different helicopters with 2 gunships was the standard. They'd pick up as many people as they could pick up in 8 helicopters. And the 2 gunships and the 8 helicopters would land in a place. You'd be told, land here, set a perimeter, make sure that you're okay, and then they would give you orders to walk in a particular direction through a particular area, or to try to find someone to engage. Sometimes, mostly what we would run into, and most of our casualties, frankly, throughout our particular battalion, and I think through the brigade and division perhaps, were booby traps, mines, and of course that's what got me, was a mine as well.
So you were out on one of these bivouac type things, and
we were walking through kind of jungle, rice paddies followed by jungles, followed by rice paddies, crossing a canal. We'd cross a canal, climb up the bank, go into a rice paddy, walk along a dike, and there was heavy jungle throughout. Here's something you might be able to show. Now that's a river. You can see a sampan right there, and that's what we would walk into once we crossed a river, if you can see that. So you can see that's very thick vegetation on the side, and everything is that. As long as it's by a river, it would be extremely thick vegetation. In fact, now that I'm looking at it, you can see men crossing, I think, that we would stretch a rope across, each person would hold onto the rope and walk across. These rivers and canals were tidal. They would be flowing one direction in the morning. They would drop down and be perhaps 2 or 3 feet deep. By afternoon, that same river or canal could be up above your head and traveling in the opposite direction. It was quite amazing.
How long did a normal mission last you?
Usually when we went out on helicopters, the mission would last about 3 days, would be an average. They would go out, depending on their supply routes, they could drop food to us or bring food to us in helicopters. Everything we had pretty much was air mobile. There were very few roads out where we went.
Now you spent a lot of time then with your boots in the water.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So you had to worry about your socks being wet, your feet being wet, and the problems arise from that, leeches.
Right. Well, yeah, leeches were prevalent. We always had leeches crawling up our legs and into our boots. While we were there, this is interesting, while we were there, when I landed, I had the regular Army boots. And after about 4 months, they shipped in some boots that looked very different. And these are the Army boots that have the webbing on the side, because people, of course, were getting what amounted to trench foot in the jungles. And so they sent out the first bunches of boots. And I remember sending in a group of 3 of my men, I believe, into Dongtam, and what they had to do was to wear these boots, get into the water, and they got to be in the swimming pool, by the way. They got to jump into the swimming pool, they could sit around, they could play cards all day and jump into the pool again. And their only job for about 3 weeks was to get their feet as wet as they could and keep them wet all the time, just to see how these new boots work. And when they came back, all of us got boots like that.
It seems to me that surviving the conditions down there was probably a bigger threat than the enemy itself.
No, the big threat was mines. Every time you walked out, we lost men almost on a daily basis if we were out in the field to mines. Sometimes really bad, awful, well, sometimes dead, but quite often bad leg wounds.
So what was the casualty rate then for your platoons?
When I left, after 9 months, I was wounded. After 9 months, I was the senior lieutenant in the entire battalion.
So the senior lieutenant had 9 months of experience.
The lieutenants, you know, because of the locations and the fact that we were with the radios, which were a target, and the fact that we were supposed to be
leading.
Well, clearly, I think if you were standing around looking at a bunch of people, you could, first thing, if I were an enemy insurgent, I would look for the radio. The radio's got to be really close to the command person. And that always made me nervous. I always wanted him to put down his antenna as low as he could, if it wasn't sticking way up in the air.
Now, you said you did step on a landmine. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, we were out, this is after 9 months, and it's the same kind of operation we always had. It was probably with 20 men. We had 2 Tiger Scouts with us, I believe. We were walking with our Tiger Scout in the front. I was 5 people back, probably, leading. And it's very difficult to walk in a big group where we were in Vietnam. There's mud everywhere, and we're walking on basically paddy dikes between the rice fields towards a wooded area. And by wooded, we're talking about a thick jungle.
So you were channeled in an area that'd be easy to find.
It would be very easy to do that. So the first person that hit it was the Tiger Scout, and this was a really bad explosion, probably with an American grenade. You could just hear the difference in different kinds of grenades after a while, and this was probably an American grenade. It sounded exactly the same. Very sharp report, broke both of his legs, and he was unconscious. We airlifted him off, moved forward. There was another landmine that went off that I think either killed or wounded one of the other Tiger Scouts and one of my men. They shipped them off, although they weren't as badly hurt. Then we went into a wooded area. We had lost 2 or 3 men by that time, and it became very difficult to find a point man. We had brave men in my unit, in my platoon, but there's a nervousness about being the first one, especially after you've lost a couple of men. And we were walking by this time in really thick brush along a river, or a canal, small canal, and I asked for volunteers. We didn't get a volunteer, so I just chose someone. I said, move on up, you're the point man, and a good man. I liked him. So I was behind him. By that time, I had moved up almost to the front of the line. I had one person in front of me. He didn't hit the landmine, but I was next in line and I got it. And it was clearly not an American grenade or a high explosive. It was probably a black powder, either a Chinese communist grenade or perhaps just a homemade bomb made out of some smaller piece of material. But it didn't have that sharp sound that you usually get. The other possibility is that it was a big grenade, but buried deeply enough that it killed the force of the grenade. I ended up with a wound that was not lethal, but it was extremely septic, very dirty. So I was shipped out, spent 2 days, I think, in Dong Tam, had the operation to get as much as they could out of it. They left the wound open and continued to debris it every day. Then I got shipped to Japan. I stayed in Japan probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks perhaps, where they continued to debris the wound, and after a period of time they sewed it up. and sent me back to Travis, then to Fort Ord, where I had a brace on my leg for a while. A little bit of a problem walking, but it gradually got better.
So did that then terminate your military career?
No, actually it didn't. I recovered pretty well. I had a slight drop foot, a little bit of a limp, but not much. I stayed around until my birthday, so I spent a total of 3 years in the Army. And at that time, they put me at a desk, and I worked with congressional correspondence, which was a good job, desk job though. And then I got out of the Army, went to college, back to the University of Florida in Gainesville. I joined a reserve unit and remained in the reserves till I retired. I switched my branch to military intelligence, went to air surveillance school and several other schools to complete my education in military intelligence. I stayed throughout my career in various training situations. I taught command and general staff for a while. I interviewed and recruited for West Point for a period of time later in my career. And eventually I got to be a lieutenant colonel and couldn't get up to full colonel, and so I was out at that time. A nice career. I'm very happy, by the way. I have no complaints at all.
If you don't mind, I'd like to revisit that last mission, some of the logistics with it. Mm-hmm. So how many medics would you have had with you?
We had 1 medic with us at the time.
And you had 4 men injured by mines?
3 or 4. I lose track now.
You were the 4th, probably.
I was probably the 4th. Yeah. Yeah.
So that medic then would stay with the platoon, and
yes.
When he medevac, they have medics with the medevac then.
That's true. When the medevac chopper comes in, the medic, the company medic or the platoon medic, that's all he does. He might get some more equipment off of if he's used up some of his equipment, he would get more equipment off of the medevac chopper. Medevac choppers, by the way, are just extremely brave. I've seen them hover over a minefield to take someone out. In fact, our captain at one point, I remember, stepped on a landmine, broke his foot. It was a very bad injury. They got his boot off. And these are boots, by the way. I'm wandering, my mind is wandering, but these are boots with the steel plate underneath it. And we took that steel plate after we got his boot off, and the steel plate had been shattered, just shattered.
Oh, wow.
It hadn't fallen apart, but it was just crinkly. You could take the boot and just move it around like this and listen to it grind. So clearly he broke a lot of bones in his foot. But it was on a bank with a lot of other mines. Everyone figured the next step is going to be an explosion. But the helicopter came and hovered about this far off the ground, and they got him onto it without it ever touching the ground, and carried him off. But my helicopter that took me away actually wasn't a medevac chopper. It was the battalion commander, I think, who came down and picked me up. I wasn't injured badly enough to make that much difference. But I had
the time that you were injured, how long till you were on a helicopter?
Well, because the battalion commander was flying around the area very close to us, it was only a few minutes, probably maybe 5 minutes. But usually a medevac chopper, they came pretty quickly, just depending on how many other people they had to pick up. It just depended on where they were at the time.
And how many people could they hold at one time then?
The most I ever saw them take off with people were a person on a stretcher and 2 people who were, I'd say, walking wounded. But I don't know how many, in an emergency, how many they could possibly take off.
But they could take 3 at least.
Oh, at least 3, yeah. Probably more.
So after you came back and stuff, how long did it take you to heal up?
Probably, once I got back to the stateside, probably 2 months before I got the brace off my leg and was walking, with a little limp, but not much.
And are you 100% now then with that leg?
Not 100%, but certainly no complaints to the Army.
But it didn't end your career, which was a big thing. And how long was your career then?
I stayed until retirement, and I guess I retired at 23 years, 24 years.
24 years.
Yeah.
So what was the favorite part of the military? What did you enjoy the most?
Oh, gosh. I think I enjoyed my reserve career a great deal. I look back with no bitterness on Vietnam at all. I wish I'd kept up better with the men I led. I only knew them by first names for the most part, by last names for the
Right.
most part. So I remember some of them, but I never kept up with them well enough. I've kept up with some of my OCS graduates, and they're my age now, and we've gotten together a couple of times, but most of them back East Coast, so it's hard to get back there sometimes. But I forgot your original question already.
That's all right. Do you have any children?
I have a son and a daughter.
And how old are they?
My son's 35, 36. My daughter's 3 years younger than that.
And neither one of them served?
No, they didn't. Neither one of them, although one of them's a school teacher, and one of them's, my daughter's a nurse, and working as a volunteer. She's actually going to Africa to vaccinate dogs for rabies.
And you did some teaching yourself, you said?
I did. After I got out, my university career ended in University of Florida in Gainesville with a teaching degree and an education degree in art education degree with a major in education. And I taught an entire career with another retirement at a junior high school, teaching 7th and 8th graders. And it was an interesting career as well.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, I knew her in high school, and we dated in high school. And when I went back out, like I say, the reason for me pushing to become an officer is I figured that with an officer's pay grade, I could afford a wife. So that's...
well, she must be pretty brave to want to marry somebody who's going to be going off to Vietnam. I mean, a lot of people were really scared to go over to Vietnam.
Well, her mother tried to dissuade her, actually.
But she wasn't going to be dissuaded?
Apparently not. We've been together for a long time now.
So how did she feel about you actually leaving?
Oh, I think she was devastated, and worried and convinced that, she might not see me again. I think all wives who send their husbands off to war and all mothers who send their sons off to war probably feel the same way. I'm sure that my parents felt the same way, and my wife did as well.
Was she living on base when you were sent overseas, or?
She went back to college, actually. She went back to her university in Fullerton and continued her education while I was in Vietnam. So she worked right through there until I came back.
So she was around family and friends and had a lot of support then while you were gone?
I think so, yeah. She had her college friends, of course, supporting her a great deal.
Now, you had one picture here I wanted to show with a bunch of girls on it. Have you thought about that? I just want to see that picture again.
All right. That was the first week that I was in Vietnam. We had our first USO show, and only one of two that I even recall. These young women, these probably middle-aged women actually, were from Australia, and they were a happy bunch of women dancing around on stage, and they bounced around so hard, as a matter of fact, that they knocked the piano accordion, or whatever they were using, on stage for the music, and they knocked it off the stage and had to do the rest of the act with no accordions.
So how often did you get USO shows then?
I only remember one other one, a very strange situation. We were out in the middle of rice paddies and jungle, and a helicopter flew down. They told us to set up a perimeter. We were with an ARVN group, actually. We were working with an ARVN platoon or company. And we had, I think, 2 of our platoons, perhaps 3 out. It was a larger operation. They landed this helicopter and off the helicopter jumps two people, a woman, mid-30s, in a very short skirt and a halter top, and a midget. And this midget had a trumpet, and they set up one mic with a boom box, what we would call a pigtail, and they had a show right there in the middle of nowhere, right out in the middle of sort of a flat place in the jungle. And I remember he was singing, "Oh, Lonesome Me," and he was playing his trumpet. And the woman would sing some torch songs, and because I was the only lieutenant in the area, she came and sat on my lap and sang to me.
Wow.
And then they jumped back on the helicopter and they were gone. I had no idea where they came from or where they went.
You didn't know they were coming? They just
No.
showed up? Saw a bunch of men on the ground, says, hey, we'll go entertain them?
I'm sure they had someone set it up ahead of time, but I don't know who. It was bizarre.
And the show with the girls, how many people would you say attended that one?
Oh, it was in a regiment, it was in a battalion base camp, so there were lots of them. They had a stage and everything. This was in Bearcat, which was, it was a fire base, but it was a larger fire base than Dirk. So there was an entire battalion there, 150 men probably.
Now, did I see you brought a mess kit with you?
I did. I brought a mess kit, and I brought this. This was sitting on my my bunk in the fire base. But I wasn't there at the time, and that's shrapnel from a mortar round that came in. And this, the same shrapnel, if you can see the holes there, the same shrapnel actually killed two men who happened to be sitting on my bunk playing cards.
So is it common for you guys to get mortared and stuff then?
Yes. Mortars were the other thing we really dreaded, because you never could really tell where they were coming from. But yeah, that was sitting on my bunk, so I've kept that.
And I notice we have some medals in there.
I do. I have a few. I have the Purple Heart, of course. That was Purple Heart they gave me, and that was one of the medals I got. Oh, the Vietnamese gave me this one. The Vietnamese government at the time. I should have been. I have no idea. It's a medal for valor of some type. Thank you for coming to Vietnam and fighting. I don't know.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
I think I've shared almost everything. Certainly all the most interesting stories. I thought the dwarf with the beautiful woman landing in our midst was probably the most interesting thing that happened.
I have to believe that. Well, Jere, thank you for coming down here and sharing with us. It's a wonderful story.
Thank you so much.
And appreciate you being here. We appreciate your service and the sacrifices you've made.
Well, thank you.
And you can let your wife know that we appreciate her bravery and having you go overseas, and marrying you before you go overseas.
Before I went over, that was amazing.
That was incredibly brave in my book. Mm-hmm. Well, that is all for us for today. This is Veterans Affair, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.